On today's episode of The Pentecostal Perspective, listen in on an interview that the host recently had with Grace Atherton. So recently I had the opportunity to be interviewed by a young lady named Grace Atherton. She's an author, a poet, a singer-songwriter, and an artist. And she has a blog called The Writing Writer. And I'll include a link to that in the show notes of this podcast. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, it will be in the description of the video. So as we're moving into this conversation, just know that this was actually part of an interview for an upcoming blog post that she would be adding to her blog about the occult and Halloween in particular. I will make mention that some of the portions where she is speaking is specifically cut out because she was actually asking clarifying questions for the blog post, and so it didn't feel like a typical interview. Nonetheless, because it was recorded, I wanted to take the time to share the testimony here and make best use of the time. Okay, grab a cup of coffee and settle in for a while as you join us on this interview. At the age of 13 is when I started dabbling with smoking marijuana, started getting into drugs just simply because I grew up in a home where my parents were avid drug users. My earliest memory of my father was him knelt down beside the pot plants that he was growing in our home and whispering to these plants and giving me a botany lesson on how that, if you talk to these plants, it's going to help them to grow. And then knowing that I had to go to school and keep this secret under wraps because at any time, if I let this out, the cops could kick in the door and take my parents away. It was a very traumatic experience. I didn't know during that time just how detrimental to the entire family structure that was and how dysfunctional really that family life was. But now looking back on it, I realized that what I thought was normal at the time was completely abnormal. And it gravitated into my teenage years. Our family bonding time is Dad would come home, he'd come through the door, we would all partake in some marijuana together. Maybe we would sit and drink together, and we would, pull up the TV, watch The Simpsons, and take a hit of acid together. And this was like normal family bonding time for us. And the premise behind this was my parents had said, well, if we're doing it at home, you're not going to go out and get arrested for it. And so they sort of hid it under this guise of, well, we're trying to protect you, when in all actuality, they were exposing me to more and more of it. And so by the time I was 15, I was a full-blown alcoholic. By the time I was 17, I was dealing drugs just to have drugs because, without having jobs and ample supply, I figured, well, that's the way I'm going to always have drugs.
And you were taking acid, you said?
Yeah, LSD, yes.
Like, when did you take LSD? Like, how old?
I would say around 14, 15.
Wow.
And I tried all kinds of psilocybin, mushrooms. About the only thing that I didn't try, Grace, was shooting up. That's the one area where I would draw the line and say, I'm not going to put a needle in my arm. During that time that I started to dabble with the LSD is also the time when I got into black magic, witchcraft, Satanism. And I gravitated towards that because, ironically, I don't think people really understand the full scope of psychedelic drugs, but they actually open up doorways to spiritual forces. And about the time that I was getting into LSD and things of that nature, I found in my school library, of all places, a Wiccan book on spells and incantations. And that just sort of gravitated into this long spiral of just darkness. And of course, just like anything that Satan does, he does not just want a portion of you. He wants all of you. And so, the Bible says that he has come to steal, kill, and destroy. His goal is not, anything other than taking your soul to hell. And so he pulled me down this long path. And as I went farther and farther down that path, that then led to ideation of suicidal thoughts. And I began to cut myself whenever I would get depressed. And, looking back on that point in time now, I didn't know why exactly I was doing it then. I just knew that it made me feel better. It made me not feel like I was in as much pain, even though I was inflicting pain, or it felt like I was getting back at the world that was against me. But now that I know what I know now, I
Hmm.
completely understand. We were made in the image of God. And this is why people will self mutilate and cut their bodies if there's demon possession or there's demonic influence in their lives, because every time a demon looks at one of us, he sees a creation, a creature that was made in the image of God. And he says, I want to destroy that. At 21 years of age, I had an existential come to Jesus moment where um, just it seemed like everything that I thought I had a hold on just come crashing down. You know, two of my best friends were being with the girlfriend that I was with for 2.5 years. There was infidelity that was involved, and that just, it crumbled me, because here I thought I had good friends and I thought I at least had a chance with a woman that, it was a very toxic relationship. I should have known better, but um, all of that just came crashing down in one night. I downed a bottle of wild turkey and I chopped all my hair off with a Bowie knife, and I walked from Cortland, Indiana, all the way to Seymour, Indiana, to Village Green, where my parents were staying at that time. So here I am. I'm heavily inebriated. I've got a lot of anger and angst going, which is also, you know, it just feeds things. And I can still remember, though, while I was making that trek to my parents' house, that I seen at least 3 police officers pass me that night. And here I'm wearing, I don't believe I was even wearing shoes at all. I'm pretty sure I was barefooted. I was wearing a Grateful Dead t-shirt, patchwork bell-bottom pants, you know, had, my hair was all hacked up. I've got hemp jewelry all over the place. My septum, my labret, my tongue, both my ears were pierced. I literally looked like, you know, an easy target for a police officer, and yet none of them stopped. I didn't know why at the time. I just thought I was getting lucky. And honestly, at that time, I didn't care if they stopped. I was ready to go to jail if that's what it took. And somehow, again, I made it to my parents' house. And now I know, because when I knocked on the door, my mom answered the door immediately. And I thought, well, that's weird. It's like 2 a.m. What is my mom doing up? She stood there and she said, Robert, God rolled me out of bed to pray for you a couple of hours ago. What's going on? Now, at this point in time, my parents were in church. They had been in church for about 2 years, and I had no clue, because I had been living on the streets and going from house to house and had no clue what my parents were doing.
Mhm.
And so I said, well, I just need a place to stay. And it wasn't uncommon for them also, when they were out of church, to tell me they were praying for me. So I didn't think anything of it until my mom said, well, don't bring anything in the house, because me and your dad, we've changed our ways. I thought, well, that's weird, you know? So, and I stayed there for a couple of months, rent free. And I remember my parents were never pushy. They never like beat me over the head with a Bible. They would say things, you know, occasionally like, well, you know where you need to be, or we're praying for you. My grandma, on the other hand, she was a little more tenacious, but she was also very sweet and kind, and nobody was being really too pushy. But something within me, about 2 months into this stay, I just woke up and I thought, you know what? I'm going to go to church with my parents, just to, out of common courtesy. They let me stay here rent free. I'm going to go to church with them this morning. I'm going to surprise them. And so I got out of bed that day, and my hair was a wreck. By this time it had already kind of grown back out, you know. And I looked at my dad. I said, hey, I'm going to go to church with you guys this morning, but I'm going just like this. And I'm almost positive I was still wearing the same Grateful Dead t-shirt and my patchwork bell-bottom pants, because I know for a fact I had my patchwork bell-bottoms on, because in the hidden pocket on the side, there was this little patch of like a mushroom. And behind that little pocket, I had a bag of weed that I had stashed in there. And that's how I was hiding it from my parents. And so I said, I'm going to take a little time to get ready, and I'm going to go with you guys. And okay. And my dad said, if you want to go like that, fine. Okay, let's go. And so I snuck off to the bathroom and I got high before we went, because I thought, well, this is going to take the edge off of things, you know. And
Mhm.
as I walked in the back door, the senior pastor stepped down from the platform. I thought, well, this isn't going to last long. You know, he's going to kick me out. It's going to be over. It's fine. Look at me. You know, I don't belong here. And he came down and he wrapped his arms around me. He said, Robert, Aaron, we have been praying for you. It's so good to see you. And that floored me. That was like not what I expected. And so I lied to him. I said, Pastor, I'm looking forward to hearing you preach. And he come back with a retort that I wasn't expecting. He said, well, actually, I'm not preaching this morning. And he turned around and I saw a young man sitting on the platform. He said, we have an evangelist here. And I thought, oh no, I've been set up. God knows what he's doing, because I already knew, having kind of grown up around the church, not necessarily been a part of the church, but grown up around it, I knew what evangelist meant. That meant, Robert, you're not going to get a free pass this morning. And so I came
Yeah.
in and I sat down with my dad. He sat the third row from the front on the left-hand side. And this man, I can literally see him taking his notes and just throwing them into the air about 10 minutes into his message. And he said, I've got to go a different direction. God's leading me a different direction. And boy, howdy was he, because for the next 45 minutes, this guy went right down my alley. He was saying things that I knew for a fact I had told no one. He was delving into areas of my mind that I knew for a fact only God knew. And so I knew that God was using this young man. And so at the end of the service, knuckles white on the back of the pew, literally, I stood up thinking to myself, man, I need a cigarette. I need to get out of here. This place the spirit was heavy in that place. He said, I would like for every eye to be closed and every head to be bowed. And let's see what God wants to do. And about the time I closed my eyes, this senior saint in the back of the sanctuary, she was a very soft-spoken saint, love her to death. Still to this day, I every time I see her, I want to hug her neck. She just began to boom under the power of God. Her voice did not sound like, it was her voice, but it just sounded so loud and clear, and like the clarity of the words that were coming out. And I don't know what kind of a language that she was speaking, but it was beautiful. It sounded some kind of like a dialect of Hebrew or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And as she began to speak in this heavenly language, I had my eyes closed, and it was almost as if God was playing a movie reel over in my head. It was kind of like, I've heard stories of people having near-death experiences, and they had these flashes of memories. It was sort of similar to that. And as I was standing there with my eyes closed, I began to see myself falling out of a car going 40, and I lived. And that was a real event that happened to me. I began to see myself waking up in pools of vomit in places that I didn't know how I'd got there. I remember hiding behind these hills in a place where we had went camping, and I'd been shot at, and the bullets, like the buckshot, was flying over my head. And 3 different occasions in my life I've been shot at, and never once did the bullets hit me. So all this was playing over my head, and this moment in my life was sort of building up to this crescendo, and this still small voice within me said, this could be your last chance. And about that time, the sister that was praying, that was speaking this beautiful language, she stopped. When she ceased, there was this lull, this silence, this holy hush is the only way I can explain it, where there was just so much expectancy in the air and just everything was silent. And about that time, the senior pastor stepped forward and he began to interpret the message that was just given in tongues. And I'm so lucky to have the recording of that. So I've heard it numerous times. I will go back at least once a year. I want to hear that again about my
You got the
conversion.
recording?
I do, yes.
Oh my gosh. I think it'd be so cool. If you're cool with letting me hear it, I'm just like, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Just for prepping for this, because it'll make you feel like I'm in that moment. Wow.
Sure, yeah. And so getting to hear that message all over again, once a year it's amazing to me. And so as he began to interpret, basically he said, you're standing here seemingly flat-footed. You don't want to move. You didn't come here to be changed. But I'm calling, the church is calling, God is calling. Will you not listen to the voice of the Spirit this morning? This could be your last chance. So that was the second time that God had reverberated in my soul, this could be your last chance. Now, he had no clue what the Spirit had just spoke to me. And for him to say that, it was such a pointed moment in my life. And as any good evangelist would do, the young evangelist took advantage of the quiet and the somber moment, and he slammed his hand down on top of that pulpit, jarred everybody awake. And when
I just heard an
eyes,
evangelist in a tent revival last night, so I'm like picturing it.
So when he did this, everybody jarred awake, and I was just dumbfounded. I was looking right at him, and he was pointing his finger right at me, and he said, young man, I don't know who you are, but I have been preaching at you all morning. And he said, this could be your last chance. Third time's charm. I pushed my dad out of the way. I ran up to the front. I began to throw my hands in the air, and I did not know how to pray. I just began to talk to God like we're talking right now. And I began to pour it out to God. And I said, God, I'm so sick of this lifestyle. I'm sick of the way that I've been living. I'm tired of waking up in places that I didn't know how I got here. And as I began to pray that prayer, this little pin of light was off in the distance. I couldn't tell you what they were singing, who was around me. My eyes were closed, but there was this little pin of light. And the longer I prayed, the closer it got, until eventually it got right in front of my face, and it just enveloped me from the top of my head to the sole of my feet. And then I audibly heard myself speaking in that same heavenly language I can't say it was the exact same language, but it was a heavenly language. It was some form of something. It was just amazing. My jaw went one way, my tongue went another. And the next thing I know, I'm opening my eyes, and all this rush of sound, like of these people, just kind of comes back in, because up until that point, it was just all I could hear was me talking in tongues and silence around me. It was almost like just me and God just had this moment. And when I opened my eyes, I was actually laying on the floor looking up at the ceiling, and I had no clue how I got there. And all of a sudden, this beautiful smile just comes on my face. And the first thought that came to me was, why didn't I do this sooner? And the second thought that came to me was, that's a real smile. Like, that's not a fake. That's not a put on. Like, I'm really smiling right now. Ironically, sister, the message that was preached that morning was on Psalms 16. In his presence is the fullness of joy, and at his right hand are pleasures forevermore. And that's what I was wanting, was joy. At the end of the bottle, at the end of the joint, at the peak of my acid trip, what I was looking for was joy and peace and something that would sustain my soul. And so the senior pastor stepped down off the platform. They picked me up off the ground. My dad was worshiping. My mom was worshiping. The whole church was just erupted with worship. And he reaches over to me and he says, Robert Aaron, how do you feel? And it sounds sacrilegious to say this now. I didn't know any better. I just looked at him and I said, Pastor, that's the best buzz I've ever had in my life. And
Yes.
he said, okay, well, that's one way to put it. And I stood there for just but a moment, and it didn't take very long at all. And I felt so clean and so right with everything around me. But then something just felt off, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And so I took my cigarettes out of my pocket and I laid them on the altar. And I thought, okay, that felt a little bit better. And then the next thing I know, I'm reaching down into that hidden pocket and I'm pulling out that bag of weed and I put it on the altar. And of course, a lot of eyes got really big in the congregation. They're like, my goodness, what else is this kid going to pull out of us? And so I stood there a little bit longer and I thought, something still doesn't feel right. So I began to take all of my piercings out. I took out my septum, my labret, my tongue, both of my ears, and I put them all on the altar. I looked at my dad and I said, when we get home, I'm burning these clothes. I'm cutting my hair. I'm done with this lifestyle. And sister, as God is my witness, I was a full-blown alcoholic at that time. I was addicted to several different kinds of drugs. I was a full-blown 2-pack-a-day smoker. But when I walked out of the church that day on August 18th, 2003, I didn't have a single headache, a single withdrawal. There wasn't even anything that had reaped my body. And when I walked out, that's been 22 years ago now, and I've never touched it since. That's the power of Jesus Christ.
You were talking a little bit about the witchcraft stuff.
Yes.
How heavily did you get involved in that?
3 of the best friends that I had at the time, we began to sit down and dabble in this stuff before we even knew. We started to do some research and come to find out all of our zodiac symbols equaled up to earth, wind, fire, and water. So it was like Satan had purposely put us together. We began to cast spells that we had found in various different books. And it's funny, when you start diving into that stuff, people all of a sudden have all kinds of information and books and Ouija boards they just want to give you, and that's not coincidence at all. So we did a couple of separation spells. Those people, miraculously things happened in their lives where they had to move to a different city or different state and so we thought, wow, there's something to this, and then we did a wind spell one night and there was a tornado that ripped through Seymour and we thought, wow, we're really on to something here. But I can say this, okay, 90% of what I saw in witchcraft was fear It was things that could hurt people, not things that could help people. So for these individuals that say, well, there's white magic, there's Wiccan magic, it's just all about the earth. It's all about, it all leads back to the same thing. You can call it white magic, you can dress it up in a pretty little
Mhm.
bonnet, but at the end of the day, it's all Satanism. And
Mhm.
so the farther we got into it, Satan did allow us to, I feel like, to see a little bit of traction because that's how he hooks you. The farther we got into it, the more we started to see, like, wait a minute, we're not controlling any of this. We think we're in control. And I'll never forget, we went to a concert one night, and one of the people that was involved in this, he was the lead guitarist for this band that was playing there that night. And it was a really like heavy metal, thrash metal, screamo type band. And they were called Jester. It was a local band here in Seymour. And they had a specific song that they played that everybody loved that was called Demon Seed. As they began to play that song, there was a mosh pit that broke out. And a mosh pit to me is basically the closest thing to hell on earth that you can get to. If it doesn't paint a good picture of weeping and gnashing of teeth, I don't know what does. And so
Mhm.
everybody began to jump into the middle of this mosh pit. And if it hadn't been recorded, sis, I wouldn't have believed it. But apparently, in the midst of all of this mosh pit, I was actually possessed by a demon. And I began
Mhm.
to literally, I beat the snot out of one of our friends. And I'm not, even then, I wasn't really a violent person. I would fight if I had to, but I wasn't the type of person that would just beat somebody up just because. I at least had enough
Mhm.
morals and scruples to know, like, that's not good.
Mhm.
We left the concert that night. I didn't know that young man had to be rushed to the hospital. We left the concert. My friends were like, "Oh, dude, you beat the snot out of him," and yada. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" We get back to my friend's house, and they pop the VHS tape into the recorder or into the VCR, and I
Mhm.
start watching myself thrashing in this thing and literally beating the snot out of this kid. I'm like, that was not me. And they said, "What
Mhm.
happened?" And I remembered, as soon as they said what happened, I had remembered that right before that happened, I was laying my head on the platform where these people were playing. And I remembered my eyes rolled in the back of my head. And then remembered nothing after that point, except for leaving the concert. So watching myself on that screen, I realized I was just possessed by a demon. Now you would think that would be enough for me to go, oh, I don't want nothing to do with this. It actually threw me farther into it because I thought, well, what else can I do with this? And that's where Satanism and acid actually got me into this crossroads where I went down some very dark paths.
I've heard of someone else. I actually wrote about them on my blog, otherwise I wouldn't do that, but they beat up someone and they have no memory of it. They were on
Yeah.
LSD and had no clue. And they were telling me, they're like, Grace, he's another one of my brothers, but he just said, Grace, he's like, I don't remember doing it. He's like, that was what was weird. He's like, I was possessed.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, you were. So, but you said you went further into that. Did you like put curses on people and stuff too?
I never went that far. A couple of my friends were trying, like those that were in our little
Yeah.
warlock fan club or whatever you want to call it. They were getting more in heavily into like the using it for hurting people. I was more
Hmm.
trying to use it to gain advantage over individuals or to get certain things that I wanted, whether it was money or drugs or popularity or fame. Um, and I'm sure too, being a creative, some of those aspects that some people gravitate to are not necessarily what we gravitate to. Like we want to be, we want to be heard and seen, and we want our music to go to the top of the charts. And I learned very quickly just how dark the music industry is when I got into
Hmm.
some of this stuff, because I started to realize a lot of the terminology that was in a lot of these books that I was reading was literally songs that were being sung on the radio. Like, a lot of people don't understand, like Stairway to Heaven and Hotel California and some of these songs, they're not just songs. There's a reason why these people would lock themselves in hotel rooms and take large amounts of drugs and then, oh, we just came out and wrote a hugely popular song. No, they didn't write that song. They were just tools in the hands of Satan to write that song. And that's why it takes a long time sometimes. And this is one area that I'll be completely transparent that I still struggle with is secular music. And it's not that I listen to it all the time. It's not that I grab it, but if I'm in a store and I hear a song, it immediately makes me think of memories that were happening with that music, or
Mm.
it'll be stuck in my head for the next 2 weeks. I'll just find myself, like all of a sudden I'll be wanting to sing a line from that song. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that, because
Yeah.
there's something to it. There's a pull to it. It's a way
Mhm.
to, honestly, if you look up, there's a man by the name of Anton LaVey. He was the founder of the Church of Satan, and he actually went in depth on this. And since then, they have taken a lot of these off of YouTube. They used to be up all over the place, but there were several people who did interviews with him. And he said, I believe it was Barbara Walters that was interviewing him, and she said, "How do you know all of these people in Hollywood, but I've never heard of you? How do you know all these famous musicians, but I've never heard of you?" And he had pictures of all these people on his walls. And he starts laughing, this maniacal laugh, and he goes, "Well, they can't be famous until they come to see me first." And she said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I have to put one on them." And she goes, "What do you mean put one on them?" And he said, "A spirit. Don't play dumb with me." And so literally he said out of his own mouth, when you're going to their concerts, when you're watching their movies, you're not watching them. You're not listening to just that person. You're listening to
Mhm.
what I've put in them. And so
Mm.
as soon as he said that in this interview, and I was actually doing putting together a sermon on what's behind rock and roll, and trying to help young people to see that it's more than
Mhm.
just music. While I was putting all this
Mhm.
together, that actually, I stumbled across that video, and I realized and understood, like, it's way deeper than what anyone thinks.
'Cause there's a lot of, like, it's not just what they're singing or
Hmm.
well, and I've realized, like, in the industry, I've realized that, like, a lot of them will have, like, demonic stuff with them. Well, wow, this is really cool, and I'll pray about whether to do this one for, like, October, around the end of October. I'm like,
Yeah,
"Ooh." Um, but, I mean, I feel like that's the only way that you expel darkness is through light,
sure,
so
sure.
that's, um but, yeah, we'll definitely have to keep it covered in prayer if we decide to do it then, that's for sure.
Well, and to make you
So
feel, maybe this is kind of a little bit of confirmation as well for you, and to make you kind of feel better about. So it was last year, right before, or it might have even been Halloween Day, I released a podcast episode called "Should Christians Celebrate Halloween?" And it's one of the episodes that
yes.
I had people emailing me. I had moms and dads emailing me. Some of them were mad, "Oh, it's just a kid's holiday. What are you doing? Why are you making it such a big deal?" But for the ones that were doing that, the numerous other people that were saying, "I have never looked at it like that until I listened to your podcast," or people that were saying, "I knew there was something wrong with it, but I didn't know how to articulate it. And now I'm sharing that episode with friends." I ended up,
Yeah.
basically, there's a church here. It's a very rural area that this lady attends. And she said that basically she had the entire youth group, the parents, everybody sit down and listen to this podcast. And that year they were going to do like a big Halloween push to try to bring people into the church. And she said, "We're doing a fall festival. We're not doing a Halloween thing anymore."
Mhm.
And I was like,
Yeah,
wow, it had that much impact on you. That's awesome. So I think it's
that's
it's
really cool.
it's needful. It really is. People need to know that that is not a holiday. That is
Yeah,
literally the one day out of the year that Satan has his most foothold on people. And the scary
yeah.
thing is that we've gravitated to that point where Christians just think it's okay.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, because I know there's, one guy, I'm trying to think of his name, John Ramirez, because 'cause I've gone to some of his stuff. He came out of Satanism
Hmm.
himself, like, hardcore, and so, yeah, that totally, like, changed my mindset about it. So I'm, like, 100% like, "No, not that." Because I think a lot of people don't realize it, and it is like, satanic stuff is not a joke. It is not a joke at all.
Thanks for tuning into another episode of The Pentecostal Perspective. I'm so glad that you decided to gather around the Word of God with us today, and I pray that you found today's topic insightful, inspiring, and encouraging. Please take a moment to leave a review on the platform of your choice. Your feedback not only uplifts, but also helps to spread these positive messages to a wider audience, allowing others to be encouraged as well. If you have any questions, prayer requests, or you would like to request a topic for a future episode, send a text message to 1-833-921-9023. Until next time, God bless you in the mighty name of Jesus Christ.